Faith. We started this conversation this month, for those of you that don't know, is on faith, and we started it 2 weeks ago when we had our spiritual brunch. And I just want to share something before we start talking this morning, that it has really cracked me open in terms of really looking at something. And like I said during the spiritual brunch, I'll tell you, there's times with it where I'm sitting there going like, yeah, I kind of doing one of those deals. And it's really making me look at things and opening me up. And as I continue to talk to people, not only in this congregation, but friends and family and everything, what I'm understanding is just how different it is for everybody. And so what I hope to share with you this morning is just what's going on inside of my mind and some things that I've explored and experimented with. But I'm really going to suggest that as we open up this thing called faith, that inside of you just understand that there's a pattern, and to pay attention to your pattern, and understand that when it comes to faith, there's a lot of things within that journey that you have choices over. That's the biggest thing that I can tell you about faith. And so as I was thinking about this journey, this thing called faith, how many people have seen the movie The Biggest Little Farm? Anybody in here see it? One person. I got one person that saw it. For those of you that have not seen it, I hope not to spoil it, but I'm going to tell you it is an absolutely magical movie. And I'll try not to give it away, but I got to tell you a little bit of it. What's that? My wife just said, don't spoil it. I don't know if that's possible. I'll do my best. It's a magical story, and it's a magical movie, and it's a real story, and it's a real movie about a couple called John and Molly Chester. And the way it started is they were living in LA, they lived in an apartment, and they got a dog from a rescue mission. And they loved this dog. It was everything to them. And what happened is, as they had the dog, over time, the dog just started getting really rambunctious, and they were in an apartment. And they did everything to make sure that this dog was okay, but the truth is what happened is it just got him to be more and more and more. And they had to make a decision. Like, we either got to get rid of this dog or we have to do something differently. Molly herself was a foodie, and she did a lot of human interest stories, and she was really into food, like a ton. And what she would do is she started growing things within their apartment, so she was making spices and all kinds of stuff. But her brain was incredible. And so what happened is there was this thing that was going on where she was doing all this stuff with this growing and gardening and stuff like that, and they had the issue with the dog. And what they did is they combined the two of them together, and they said, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could somehow or another make those two work? And that's where the story starts, is this idea of, well, what could they do? And so what happens is she comes up with this vision. She says, well, what would happen if we moved out of the city and we actually went and got a farm? And that way the dog could go do what the dog needs to do, and then I could sit there and create all these wonderful, magnificent things while I'm planning and everything else that I want to do. And that's how it started. They had a vision. She had a vision of what she wanted to accomplish. Now, understand something. They weren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. They had no idea how they were going to do this, but they started. And what did they do? They actually had a party, brought everybody together, and they told their friends and everything, hey, guess what we're doing? We're going to go buy a farm. And everybody said, and how are you going to pay for that? And they said, we have no clue. We have no idea, but we're doing it. That's what we're going to do. And that's what they did. And so the story is how they went and they started looking for farms. And eventually they were able to get this land. And eventually they were able to take this land that was, for the most part, barren and create something. I try not to give it away. But to create something that was absolutely, I'm telling you, it's magical. Magical to see what they're able to do. But it wasn't without a lot of stuff. And in my opinion, that story epitomizes faith. And so that's what I want to share with you this morning. What are the lessons about faith that this movie taught me when I watched it? So I'm going to break down faith in terms of the way that I understand it. And I'm going to start off with a piece of it that you're going to look at me and think I've lost my mind.
We do that all the time.
There you go. Not surprising, right? Thanks, Tony. Keeping me on my toes, right? I'm going to start off the conversation about faith with talking about doubt. Doubt. Why would I do that? Wait a minute, Mike. I thought this talk was going to be about faith. Why are you going to mention doubt? I was listening to a podcast this week from Ken Burns. Ken Burns, a famous movie maker, and he said something that just blew my mind and brought it all together for me. He said, the opposite of faith is conviction. The opposite is conviction. In order to have faith, there's always a certain amount of doubt. Wait a minute. I've read this thing called the Bible my entire life. I've always said that I had to have faith, and that was really, really important. In fact, Jesus Christ himself said if you have the faith of a mustard seed, that means not very much. Well, if I don't have very much faith in that little piece right there, that mustard seed, what does it mean is going on for the rest of the time? Doubt. So wait a minute. You mean to tell me that in order for me to have faith, there's a portion of it where there's doubt? Yes! Do you guys get that? It takes all the pressure off of you. You don't have to do it perfectly. You can have doubt and still have faith. In fact, it's part of faith. That's mind-blowing to me, personally, because I've heard the traditional understanding of what it means to have faith, and nobody ever told me that doubt was part of it. Nobody. And it was like, wow, so you mean to tell me I can actually practice faith and that doubt's part of that? Yes. Yes. Takes the pressure off. Don't have to do it perfectly. Right? In the movie, when I think about that, when it comes to doubt, let's see. They were going to go buy this massive piece of land in Northern California. They didn't have a penny. Right? They went there and they bought this land. I'm telling you, it was dirt and desert. There was nothing there. Nothing. They were told time and time and time again, don't do it. Don't do it. And there's several other things in the movie that happen where you're sitting there going like, what are they doing? Why? What are they doing? Because it just didn't make any sense. And so the point that I want to bring with you today about faith is that faith, part of it, there's a portion of doubt. In fact, I would argue, after I really started thinking about it, that I think that doubt plays a big part of it. A big part of it. The second thing, everybody, I think, kind of understands this from the standpoint of trust, right? When we think about faith, often it comes down to this thing of trust. So what is it that we trust when we talk about faith? God. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. Obviously, because of my background and my spiritual practices and everything else like that, I believe that that is always there, that that's always a part of the equation. In other words, I believe whenever I start thinking about faith that this thing that's called God, that I'm a part of it. And that if I remember my connection to my divinity, and I remember this thing's out there that's called God, that usually I'm pretty okay. And so there's this thing when we think about trust and we think about faith, there's this thing about connecting to this thing called God. But to me, what I always find so interesting about that is often there's more parts of it. I don't know if it's like that for you guys, but when we think about faith and having trust, it's more than just this thing out there called God. How about faith in ourselves? Think that might not be important? Yeah. Anybody ever have a moment in their life where they didn't have faith in themselves? Right. Yeah, I think we all do. But it's something to think about because we sit there and walk around talking about faith, and we always bring up God, but we don't talk about faith in ourselves. To me, I think that's a pretty important aspect of faith to consider and look at. How about life? What? Yeah. How about life? How about just trusting that this path that you're on, I don't care if it's about your career, I don't care if it's about your finances, I don't care if it's about your health, I don't care if it's about your relationships. I don't care. What if we just trusted? My personal belief, don't expect everybody to go here with me, but my personal belief is before we came here, we kind of had an idea what we wanted to figure out. My belief is we came down here and we're figuring it out. And therefore, everything that shows up in my life, I believe, is by divine appointment. I don't expect everybody to go there. That's what I believe. And so therefore, I believe in life. I trust it. I trust it as sure as I'm standing here right now, and I trust it that no matter what happens, that there's a reason for it. That I haven't done anything wrong. That I'm not being punished. That God hasn't left. And that I'm doing exactly what my soul set me here to do, and I'm right on track. In other words, I'm not wrong. Not. Ever. Wrong. And then faith in others. I have faith in others. I have faith in the people at this church. I have faith in my wife. I have faith in the people that I work in. I have faith that we, as a consciousness, as a humanity, no matter what everything out there is telling us is going on right now, you know what I have faith in? We're going to figure it out. And we're going to do it better. That's my faith, is that we will do it better. So I do trust in everything, whether it's people in this church, people in the community, people in this country, or people in the world. I have faith. I have faith in people. When we talk about faith, and I think about the movie, they had faith in nature. They had faith in nature, and their belief was that if they could create an ecosystem and keep the ecosystem healthy, that nature would take care of itself. And there's some pretty amazing examples of that. I'll only give one away, not two. I'll only give one away. So as they're creating this amazing farm, what starts to happen is stuff starts to grow and starts to happen, and all of a sudden things start showing up. Nature starts to be nature, and nature starts to thrive. And all of a sudden what they noticed is out in their place, they noticed that these snails started to come. And I don't mean like one or two snails, I mean hundreds. Like they would walk out into their forest that they'd made, and the next thing you know, they would walk around and they would carry away every night 5-gallon buckets of these snails. It was crazy. Like there's no way they could get all these snails. And they're like, how can we, what are we going to do? But they trusted, and they figured that somehow, some way, someplace, nature's got an answer for this. It does. And so they did an interesting thing. What they did is they thought about snails, and they thought about, okay, what's a predator of snails? And they looked it up, and they found out that ducks were a predator of snails. Guess what they had? Ducks. Guess what they did? Let the ducks out and go into the trees. Guess what the ducks did? They ate all the snails. And what happened is what you would see over and over and over again, because they trusted nature to do what nature does when it's allowed to do it, it happened over and over and over again. Where something would happen, it would seem to get out of balance, and all of a sudden they would just come up with a solution, and they didn't do anything other than to facilitate and let nature do what nature knows how to do best. They stayed out of the way, and they let it do it. And it's just, to see it happen time and time and time again is just magical. Just magical. Another part of faith, letting go. Letting go, right? And so we at Unity have this thing that we say, we let go and we let God. Now, for some people, that means a complete, oh, well, I guess it's going to be this way. And the truth is, it's not. It's one of the most powerful moments that we can have. The most powerful moments that we can have. Why? Because prior to that, more than likely what's going on is that we think that we have got it figured out and we know exactly what to do, so probably we are not understanding that we've got this thing called God, kind of like this important thing that might help us figure it out. But we forget. And so what happens is when we let go and we let God, guess what we're doing? We're just opening ourselves up. We're saying, hey, I don't have all the answers. I don't know the answer to what's going on here. I'm not even sure what's going on or how. I don't know. But then you can open yourself up and you can connect with, and that's to me what it is. I've said this before, it's an engaging your divinity. You're connecting and just asking for help. And it's not a giving up. To me, it's just the opposite of giving up. It's the opposite of giving up. And yet some people think letting go and letting God is giving up. No, for me personally, it's got nothing to do with giving up. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Fillmore says, when we give ourselves entirely to Spirit, we may do things without knowing exactly why. That is because faith is at work in us. And even if we don't know the law and cannot explain faith to the outer consciousness, it continues to do its perfect work and eventually brings forth the demonstration. So in other words, when we trust, when we let go and we let God and we trust, we're going to start doing things probably a little bit differently than the way we've been doing them. Why? Because faith works. And you're going to be guided. And you're going to be directed, and you're going to be driving down the street. Next thing you know, you're going to be pulling into a friend's house and going, why am I sitting in my friend's driveway? That's what it looks like. Or the next thing you know, you're going to get an idea to make a phone call and say, I don't know why I'm calling you, but apparently we're supposed to be on the phone today. Or I shared this story with you. Maybe you're sitting at the computer and all of a sudden you look up, I want to see about software for playing music in a church, and all of a sudden you've got all these things that are going on with software at church. For no apparent reason. Why? That's faith. That's connecting your divinity. That's getting ideas and being in alignment and opening yourself up, and then all of a sudden you start getting ideas for things that you can do differently. That's how it works. That's how it works. The other thing that you're letting go of, and I talked about this in our brunch, was the illusion of control. We honestly think, some of us, guilty as charged right here, that there's times when we have control. And guess what? There's times when we don't. That's just the truth. Right? That's just the truth. What's illusion of control? It's a cognitive bias which leads us to assume that we have complete control over the outcome of a situation in an instance where we do not. It's actually a psychological issue that some people try to control everything. Have you ever been there? Have you ever had something in your life that wasn't exactly going the way that you wanted it to, and you just I can do this, I can do it, and the intensity, it's like, I can make this thing happen. And it's not happening? You know what that feels like? Anybody? Yeah. Yeah. It's like, there's some things in life, and this is where it gets tough, even for me standing here to share this with you, where I just have to, I don't have control. I don't. And there's a part of me that goes, wait a minute, what about all this, personal growth and development and going for your goals and doing everything and all that and everything? What about all of that? And it's like, yes, and yes. Do all of that. That's how we step in and actually engage with our divinity on this planet. Be a creator. That's what we are. But there has to be a point in that process, there has to be a point in that entire process where you finally say, hands off. Hands off. I let go, I surrender it, and I let go of the control. And that's what happens. That's one of the things that we let go of, is to let go of the control. Because when we can let go of the control and we just let things be what they are, and we accept them, then all of a sudden we can at least breathe, we can at least relax, and be in a moment of peace. There's a part in the movie where they go and they bring a guru. He's the guy that looks at the land, and he's well known for taking and creating these really super healthy ecosystems. And he shows up, and he is he's the guru. He's the guy that they follow. They do everything that he says to do. And as they're working on this project, about a year and a half into the project, he dies. He dies. And they're sitting there going, what do we do now? What do we do? And that's where all of a sudden it's got to be this let go, that you're not in control, that maybe there's something more to just you and this thing that's going on, but actually the truth is there's this whole thing that we're surrounded by. It's called God. And we can release it and we can let it go and know that it's got a bigger plan, a bigger idea on what's going on. The other thing that it talks about when I look at the anatomy of faith, it means and it requires us to continue moving on even when we're not sure. Even when we're not sure. We have no idea what to do, how to do it, why to do it. In this movie, what happens, one of the things that happens is that they wind up raising pigs. And they got this awesome little pig named Emma. And Emma's just the coolest little pig you ever see in your life. And Emma is thriving. She's doing great. And then they finally decide that they're going to breed Emma. And so they breed Emma, and Emma has piglets. And everything's going fine until they take the piglets away. And they apparently, I don't understand these things, but they take the piglets away, and all of a sudden what happens is Emma starts basically not responding. She's getting lethargic, she's starting to get sick, she's starting not to eat, she's starting to do all these things. And it honestly is to the point where she has eaten for days now, and she's not moving, she's not responding, she's not doing anything. She's not. And they really think, they have doctors come in and everything, look at Emma, they're trying to figure it out, and they're like, we don't know what's going on. And it really comes down to where they think Emma's going to die. In fact, they've pretty much decided that that was going to happen. And so John goes home, and all of a sudden he has a thought. And he gets up the next morning and he says, screw it. I don't care what all the experts say I'm supposed to do or not do. I'm going to put the piglets back in with Emma. In other words, I'm going to return the piglets back to their mom. And so he does it. Guess what happens? Boom. She responds. Comes right back. But they didn't know. They weren't sure. But he continued. The one thing about the story that I want to assure you is there was a lot of times within this movie, a lot of times within this journey where they just didn't know. They didn't know. But they kept taking action. They kept following the vision. They kept following the dream. They kept following the understanding of, all right, what's going on? Practice. The anatomy of faith is practice. How many people here have a faith practice? Actually, there's a few hands. I wasn't expecting very many, quite frankly. Faith is a muscle. It's a muscle, and it takes practice. That's my experience. So what I notice is that, and I'm going to share my practice with you in a minute, but what I notice is the more I practice it, the more it's there for me, and it's not like I need massive amounts of faith every single day. But when those moments in life show up where it's required, is that I'm able to use it and tap into it a lot easier than if I just ignore it and do nothing, and then all of a sudden I get a bombshell that's dropped on me, and now all of a sudden I got to function in that moment of the moment where I'm not sure what's going on. I'm not sure why this is showing up in my life. I just don't know. So it requires a practice, and I thought I'd share a few of the thoughts of what my practice kind of looks like. So one of the things is that first and foremost is I accept what is. Now I want you to understand something. I accept what is in the moment right here, right now. My acceptance is what's here, right now, not what's going to be down the road. So if something shows up that isn't exactly what I would say favorable or what I was hoping for, I don't project into the future what it's going to look like in a week or a month or a year down the road. I just go, okay, this happened. I accept it. Can't change it. I'm not going to argue with reality. I'm going to accept what is. I make sure, especially of my background and where I came from, because I get triggers, right? I'm just like you guys, right? I grew up in an environment that wasn't really healthy, and occasionally stuff shows up. So for me, shame and blame is a big thing in terms of my own personal processes. So the first thing I remind myself of is I didn't do anything wrong. I did nothing wrong. So in other words, I don't go into shame or blame like I used to do when things would show up. So there's no shame, there's no blame, none. I didn't do anything wrong. Remember a few minutes ago I talked about this idea that I believe my path is absolutely where I'm supposed to be every single time? Well then if that's the case, then there's no shame or blame. That's a huge relief for me personally. It's a huge relief. The other thing I remind myself is I'm not being punished. So, you guys know my story. I grew up a fundamentalist, so occasionally I still think that. Not very often. I've been a long time ago, that's what I used to do. But occasionally, I got to remind myself, I'm not being punished. That's not in the cards. That's not how this thing works at all. But yet there's still a little part of me, just being real here for a minute, that says, maybe this should be happening. It's like, no, that's not it. That's not it. And then I remember that God's still here. Don't forget, Mike, by the way, God's still here. And you're connected to that thing called God, and that gives you a lot of opportunities here. So God hasn't gone anywhere. He hasn't disappeared in this moment. He's still out there. She's still out there. It's still out there. And you're still a part of it. Don't forget that. Don't forget it. I mentioned this earlier. This is part of my journey, and so guess what? I get to decide what it means. Nobody else gets to decide for you what this moment in your life means. You do. You get to make that decision. So is this thing a great opportunity for me to learn and grow and expand, even though I may not understand it? Or is this maybe something not so rosy? All I'm sharing with you is that you get to make that decision. That's your choice, nobody else's choice. The other thing, and I just want to say this, because I've said this before up here, but I'll continue to say it, process whatever's going on emotionally. In other words, don't ignore it. I'll give you an example. My sister just passed. You guys know that, right? For me to sit there and make that all rosy and great without processing this thing they call grief and letting that come out and get out of my system, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what Unity's talking about. That's not what anybody's talking about here. You process the emotions. So if you're scared, be with your being scared. If you're frustrated, be with being frustrated. If you're confused, whatever. If you're for anything, process it. Don't run from your emotions. They're there for a reason. Often, if we'll just let them come up, they'll leave a lot faster. Be with your emotions. Your emotions are good. They're there for a reason. A very, very, very good reason, I would add. So be with them, process them, allow yourself to have them. Give yourself permission to have your emotions. And then I tell myself, I'm choosing faith over fear. Because if I'm not careful, if something hits me hard enough, I can go into fear. And what happens for me personally when I go into fear is, guess what? I become disconnected. I forget who and what I am. I forget God's here. I forget everything. And then all of a sudden, I can, if I'm not careful, go into flat-out panic. Anybody ever go there? We all have. We all have, right? And so I just make a decision. I'm choosing faith over fear. That's what I'm doing. And I'm going to focus on having faith, that everything is there for a reason, that I'm just here to learn some stuff, that this is just another lesson for me, and the more that I can process this thing, the faster I'll move through this phase of my life, hopefully, right? As opposed to the other side of it, which is, why is this always happening to me? How come I never learn my lessons? How come? And it's like, you wind up, my experience in life has been when I do that, I wind up staying in whatever that is longer. That's not a lot of fun. From personal experience, I can tell you, it sucks to be stuck in something like that for year after year after year after year, right? When I'm able to accept it, when I'm able to go, okay, what's the lesson here for me to learn? And I'm open to learning the lesson, whatever it may be, and understand that it's not a mistake and I didn't do anything wrong. Man, it just allows me to move through it a lot quicker, a lot easier, without judgment, without me blaming other people, without me blaming myself, without me blaming the situation. It just lets me do it. And then I just remember something. Guess what, Mike? If you forget all of that, it's okay. I don't have to do it perfectly. Because remember what I said earlier? Doubt's part of the process. Doubt is part of the process. So if I don't do this perfectly, I'm still perfect. Why? Because doubt has to be there. Because if it wasn't, then I would know. And there's a difference between knowing and having faith. There's a difference. The story about what they go through in their journey is magical. And so there's several parts in that whole process where they're standing there and you can just tell. One of the things that happens is all of a sudden this huge, massive rainstorm hits. And they're afraid that basically, now they've been doing this now for a couple of years, there's a lot that's going on, and normally when this thing happens, what happens is it creates landslides and it does all this stuff that's not good, right? And so they see this big storm's coming and they do everything that they can prepare for, but the truth is, normally, there's going to be a lot of damage. So once again, they practice their faith and they trust. And something amazing happens. And that is because of the fact that they took care of the earth, because of the fact that they've done all these things that they needed to do to make this land produce and become what it became. As a result of it, when the rain fell, it filled the aquifers on the land, and it didn't flood. And it was the only property all around them that didn't have massive flood damage and mudslides and everything else like that. It didn't happen to them. In fact, what it did is it filled them so that they could use that water to do the things that they needed to do on the land. And so this thing was happening without them even knowing it. And what I'm saying is when you engage in faith, there's things that are happening without you even knowing it. If we can just trust. If we can just trust. So again, the parts of faith. Doubt. Trust. Letting go. Continue to move forward when you're not sure. And practice. Each and every one of us has our own thing going on here. Each and every one of us has questions. Each and every one of us has doubts. Every single person in here, and in my opinion, every person on this planet, we all have moments where we're just not sure. Having a faith practice gives you an opportunity to do something instead of choosing fear, which is so easy to do because, honestly, that's what we're taught as society happens when something shows up in our life if we're not careful. And all I hope and pray that you take away from this message this morning is that you've got a choice. It's your choice. Just understand. It's just simply a matter of choice. And my hope and prayer for you is that you're able to choose faith versus fear. That option, no matter who you are, no matter what's going on in your life, I just hope that you understand you have that choice. It's yours. God bless. If we could have the